All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads, because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, the heart of Missouri.
What a difference a week makes in Missouri politics. Last week we were joined by now former Speaker John Diehl, and this week for our end of session show we're joined by going to do exclusively our opinion maker panel. We're very pleased to be joined by former state senator from St. Louis County, Tim Green, Jeff Rainford, former chief of staff to Mayor Slay and now just St. Louis extraordinaire, maestro, man behind the curtain, Jane Duker, the queen of all media, I guess it's fair to say, KMOX, now This Week in Missouri Politics, and attorney here in St. Louis. And for the first time, we're very excited to have a fellow Southeast Missourian, Steve Tilley, former Speaker of the House and now a governmental consultant in Jefferson City. I'll start with you, Steve. There's obviously one topic on everyone's mind in Missouri politics this week, and that's the resignation of John Diehl. There was a scandal that came out with some texting with an intern. Give us your take on how John handled it and moving forward.
Well, one, I mean, it's a sad situation, not just for John and his family and the intern and her family, but the House as a whole. And, you know, I think he handled it the best way he could. I mean, so often we see people that make mistakes ask for forgiveness, but really aren't willing to go the extra mile to accept the consequences of those actions. And John, contrary to a lot of people who advised him, said, nope, I'm going to take my consequences and move on and not blemish what he's done in his career, which has really been a great record of accomplishment, but what his caucus has done and what the House has done as a whole. So tough situation, sad situation, but I think he handled it the best he could.
Jane Duker, you've been around these, you've counseled people in similar professional crises. How did John handle it, and what will you remember John Diehl as?
Well, you know, it's hard. I mean, I've known John for 30 years, so, you know, I've seen him throughout his whole career and life, and it is horribly sad, and I think he did do the only thing he could do. I think if he had hung on, it would have made it impossible to get real work done in the state of Missouri, and so I think it was important that he did the right thing. I think it's still going to be difficult for Republicans to sort of recover. I mean, that is a huge change. People don't realize that a change at the top like that, what kind of sort of reverberation that it causes, and I think we're going to be seeing that for a while. I think people were sort of, you know, ready and locked and loaded for his sort of speakership, and now that's going to switch quickly. And from a St. Louisan's perspective, I hope that, you know, I was happy to have John in the speaker's role because of his commitment to St. Louis, and I hope that that doesn't change. I mean, I think that's something that we will be looking at, and we like to have people in leadership. I'm a St. Louisan, so I'd like to see how that goes and how the rural-urban split is handled by the new speaker, Todd Richardson. I've worked with him. I think he's smart. I think he's savvy, and so I think he's a good choice. But I'm curious to see how this will look.
Senator Green, you've been an elected official. You've been in this, not this spot, but you've been in tough spots. You've served with people that have had career crises. Give us your take.
I think I agree with both Steve and Jane. He did the right thing. He moved on, and he accepted the consequences. When people elect people to office, they want them to be responsible. And he made a mistake, and he took the responsibility of dealing with the consequences. When you have a 20-year-old daughter like I do, your sympathy is a little less sympathetic to the speaker, but I think he made the right choice in what he did.
Jeff Rainford, you've been in those rooms and those tough decisions and talked to people that are in similar spots. How did John handle this?
This could have been the end of John Diehl, not only as a politician, but as a lawyer and a person who can participate in civic affairs if he had handled it the wrong way. I think he handled it the right way. I think that this is not the end of the story of John Diehl. It's the end of his political career. But as Jane pointed out, I mean, this is going to be a real blow for St. Louis, because while I'm a Democrat and he was a Republican, I didn't agree with him on a lot of the policy matters. He was a very strong, effective voice for St. Louis in a legislature that we in St. Louis always complain is rurally dominated, and we've lost that. But I hope that what happens here is that this ends up being a story of redemption, that because of the way he handled it, hopefully the way he handles himself going forward in a different way, not as an elected official, that John will continue to participate both in important legal matters in St. Louis, but also important civic matters, because he is a very smart, substantial guy who can talk to, listen to, and work with, people, both Democrats, Independents, and Republicans.
Jeff, this is one thing that's being asked now, that kind of the shock is being to where all people are moving forward. You've cultivated, when you were with the mayor, I mean, he's the most popular elected official in the state. Republicans come to him and want to work with Mayor Slay. But if you look around St. Louis County now, there is a little bit of a void in that leadership. There's no leadership, in-house leadership from St. Louis County. John Diehl was that more pragmatic, Reagan-type Republican that could work and could represent St. Louis. Who are you going to turn to now when you need things? I mean, Senator Schmidt's coming to the end of his time in the Senate. Who do you turn to?
Well, I don't know that there is anybody. First of all, I think that Todd Richardson, I don't want to say anything negative about Todd Richardson, because I think that he's not John Diehl, he's not from St. Louis, but the mayor, I know Mayor Slay has spent time cultivating a relationship with him, and I think he's going to be a good speaker. He's not a St. Louis guy, but I think he's going to be the next best thing. I think as long as, and we saw it in Right to Work, and senators took goofy positions because they're running for statewide office, I think things are going to be very unsettled in the next legislative session. I don't know. You guys will have to predict what will happen, but I don't think there is anybody to talk to. We have a lame duck governor, and everybody and their brother are running for some statewide office right now, and so I don't know that the next session is going to be, I think it would have been a lot different if it was John Diehl's last session. I think that would have been very good for St. Louis, and I mean that from a civic standpoint. I mean, he supported the life sciences, he supported technology, he supported Cortex, which is not far from here, the research and technology neighborhood near the Central West End. I think there's going to be a real void, and I can't be optimistic that over the next year it's going to get better, but obviously after the 16 elections are settled, hopefully we can get back to normal.
Steve, you know that caucus, when you have John leaving the House now, Senator Schmidt's coming to the end of his time. Who fills the void? And the Republicans dominate Jefferson City. Sure. Who fills that void in St. Louis?
Well, I think you've got a lot of talented people, but I agree with Jeff. I mean, it was a big loss to St. Louis. I've had an opportunity to serve with a lot of legislators, House and Senate, and I knew within about a week of John being there, his intellect was just better than most. His strategic sense was the best I'd seen in the Capitol. And when I look back on my career, I can point to maybe, as far as really good at what they do, Jason Crowell and John Diehl would be probably at the top of my list. The totally different styles. One was a deal maker, and one was a blow this place up. But in their own way, nobody could argue that they weren't effective at what they do.
And you could list them. You had the congressional redistricting map that worked out fabulously for Republicans. Yep. You had the first tax cut in decades and decades and decades. Even when he was Speaker this year, you passed education reform that I can't imagine the governor could veto. I mean, the man has a lengthy record. But I guess begs the question, if you're going to go to the legislature, you have to know a Republican. They dominate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who you call now from St. Louis?
Well, I mean, I agree with Jeff. I mean, if I had to pick up the phone, I would call Todd Richardson, and I'd worked with him before he ascended, and we'll work with him again. And I do think he has amazing capability.
But isn't it important to have someone from the St. Louis area in those leadership spots?
Yes.
I mean, it is the economic engine of the state. It's politically, it's the biggest media market. Fundraising, it's where most of the money comes from. There will be a chance for a Don Gosen to step up, or someone to step up and start to fill that vacuum. I mean, Senator Green, you saw your colleagues across the aisle. They might not like the big city of St. Louis, except when it comes time to fundraise or campaign. St. Louis is a nice place to be. Who fills that void?
Well, I'm going to be an optimist. Everybody is replaceable. Right now, you have in St. Charles County the President of the Senate, Tom Dempsey. St. Charles County is part of the St. Louis metropolitan region. There's a lot of issues that are still on the table that have yet to be resolved. We got a major issue with infrastructure in this state. We have not taken a step forward in solving that issue, and that's been on the table the last 10 years. So when someone goes, I always believe there's someone that'll fill the void.
And Tim's right. I mean, I think it's a false choice. I don't think you have to say who's St. Louis going to go to, because when you look at past speakers, I think St. Louis probably felt that Rod Jetton was fair. I think when you look at my speakership, and I took local control of the police department I wasn't from St. Louis. I think Todd will be a leader and be a leader for the entire state. And I think if there's an issue that's important to St. Louis, which is the economic engine of the state, I think Todd's going to wrap both hands around it and be a leader.
Well, Jeff, let's talk about the next big thing in Republican politics. I mean, it's been a bit of a Southeast Missouri secret, and then as he became floor leader, it became a Jefferson City secret. Now you're going to see Todd Richardson, and he's probably one of the most impressive political leaders to come along in a very long time.
Yeah, no, and even you know, before I think everybody knew that he was going to be you know, ascend to the speakership. I mean, he reached out to the mayor. He's reached, and not just reached out to the mayor to say, hey, let's have coffee. We have a real issue with violent crime, and he actually picked up the phone and called the mayor and said, what can I do to help you with the gun court, which is something the mayor's been pushing for the last 3 years. So not only does he know politics, but he is interested and knows policy. And not only does he know policy that affects his part of the state, he's interested in policy in St. Louis. You know, Tim's being an optimist. I think I'm a pessimist. Not really. I think I'm a realist. I think the real issue here are term limits, and I think that, you know, you were a good speaker, but you're not the speaker today. And John's not. Even if this hadn't happened, he wouldn't have been the speaker after next year. And if you look at, like, I always think about this as baseball. And if the Cardinals had players who could only play 5 years and they're out, after a certain period of time, you would have double-A players, you know, on your major league roster. That's just the way the math would work. And so I do think that we have to face up. I think that the civic and business community in St. Louis and the local political community in St. Louis has to face up to the fact that, you know, they don't make them like they used to.
Well, but Jane, sometimes, I mean, you might look to Todd Richardson as part of the reason term limits work. His father served in the House, had a very successful career in the minority. Now he's seeing his son become Speaker. I mean, I think when you start clicking off a Francis Slay, an Eric Schmidt, a Chris Koster, a Tom Dempsey, he has the skills to be right in with that group and not miss a beat.
Well, and that's why, and that's why I think that's a false choice, because I think somebody like Todd Richardson would succeed, you know, with term limits. That kind of talent sort of comes to the top, and it always has. I mean, Tom Dempsey is the last person in the legislature that I worked with when I was in the last guy, and I enjoyed working with him in the House. And the day I met him, I knew.
Congratulations to his daughter for graduating.
Absolutely, and I worked with him and knew he was a star the day I started working with him in the House on economic development and other issues, and always knew that he was somebody, and he has been throughout the years, somebody you can work with. And so I think good talent will come. Term limits have frankly ruined this state. People do not have to live with the consequences of what they do. When I saw Wayne Good and John Russell, 60 years of budget experience, walk out the door in one day, you know, that's hard to look at, because, you know, they know the decisions, that we're not remaking mistakes. I'm already seeing mistakes that were made, you know, 15 years ago being made again. Not dealing with transportation, which is a huge one. So I think term limits really does decrease the policy, because we are redoing mistakes we've already redone.
You know, a friend of mine from Nevada came in, and he wanted to see the House chamber. And when you looked at the speakers that I knew of, you looked at Bob Griffin, Steve Gaw, Kreider. Well, after term limits, I didn't see a huge drop-off in the quality of the people that served as Speaker.
But it's not just the Speaker. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, you know, this is a breeding ground and a building ground of leadership and knowledge and policy innovation and development that, you know, we never get ahead of the curve, because by the time anybody gets to be any sort of expert in an issue, they have to move on. I mean, I look at Ryan Silvey, great budget guy. Soon as he gets fantastic at it, and he's going to have to go. You know, Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. We need to develop experts if we're going to move forward, and you can't develop experts.
And they got to be able to get to know each other and trust each other.
That's right.
And not only across party lines, but across geography. And you know, and I get that, you know, we don't have term limits in Congress, and now even in the Senate, you know, the decorum doesn't exist anymore. But, you know, we are now in a day and age where Republicans consider Democrats Democrats to be evil and Democrats consider Republicans to be evil, and then we wonder why we have gridlock. And so that was one of the things about John Diehl, is while he was very conservative, and I disagreed with him on right to work, and I disagreed with him on welfare reform and Medicaid expansion, the guy didn't, understood that he could talk to Mayor Slay, he could talk to the county executive, he could talk to Democrats, and we're losing that. Now, maybe that's not entirely term limits, but it is going to make it harder and harder to build consensus around issues like infrastructure, education, which really ought to be nonpartisan issues.
Senator Green, can we get last takes on John Diehl?
Yes, I is one that has been term limited and had the fortunate opportunity of serving 22 years, 14 in the House and 8 in the Senate. I always defined a legislator as an individual that knows a little about a lot of things. And then when you brought forth term limits, the education of that information of knowing about a lot of things dwindles that they know a little about a few things. Right. And you sit there and you educate a legislator that becomes very knowledgeable on energy policy, on infrastructure needs, on healthcare needs. They're the leader of that issue within 2 to 4 years. In 6 to 8 years, they're gone because they have future opportunities for their political career or their professional career. But you have to keep the good ones, and one of the ways to keep the good ones is to lengthen the opportunity of service of these individuals.
We're coming up on a break. Give me your last take on John Diehl.
My last take on John Diehl, I think everybody's replaceable. I think he was good for the metropolitan area, and I think he did the right thing. He took the consequences for his actions.
Jane Duger, John Diehl.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way, and I think change is hard, and I think change is already fast enough in Jeff City, and this is going to reverberate, and I will be curious to see, and I think this will show Todd Richardson's leadership, and I look forward to it.
Steve Tilling.
Led the Republicans to the largest majority in the history of the state, was a great leader, made a mistake, and in my opinion deserves forgiveness.
Jeff Rainford.
He made a big mistake. He accepted the consequences, and for his sake and the sake of the region, I hope his best days are still ahead.
I would say those without sin cast the first stone, right?
Absolutely.
Pretty much.
And we'll leave it with that. And we'll be right back with our Opinion Maker panel. We'll discuss the session and maybe what's left over to do next year.
All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, the heart of Missouri.
Welcome back to This Week in Missouri Politics. We're going to move on with our Opinion Maker panel. It's been gracious enough to stay with us for the entire show this week and talk about the legislative session. And we'll start. Senator Green, what's the biggest thing that got passed this year?
Well, I think the most controversial thing that was passed was right to work. And I think it's a fallacy to think right to work is the reasons jobs are not coming to the state of Missouri. There's 4 economic development variables in any reason a business comes. It's energy cost, educated workforce, infrastructure, and incentives. If you look at the last several incentive packages is what brought business to Missouri. The GM Ford tax incentives, where we gave Ford about $600–800 million in incentives, GM $300 million, up to $500 million. The special session with Boeing, local taxes and state incentives was close to $1 billion. They commit to it. The issue is not right to work, and we continue to see this division in the Missouri General Assembly dealing with right to work. All right to work does is it takes away an employer's choice to have a union security clause.
Yeah, what about, Ginger, what about the employers that are here? Maybe they, why is the government messing with their...
That is what it really astounds me, is that, name me the list of companies that were calling for this. Missouri's employers were not calling for this. This is a solution without a problem.
Can the government create jobs, really? I mean, as an employer myself, please stop helping me. You have these W-2 legislators that want to pass laws.
But that's not a right to work issue, because what you're doing is you're interfering with a private contract. That's not,
With
has
another
nothing
law.
to do. And so, you know, I don't understand it, and it's not going to be law. So we did this whole rigmarole and this whole cosmetic exercise for something that's going to be vetoed. It's not going to be overridden. And what didn't get done because we did this dance, because a few people want to go back to their district and say, I got it out of the Senate. There isn't normal citizens don't care that you got to vote on something if it doesn't become law and it doesn't affect their lives. So when I think about how much time, energy, you've shut down the Senate because of this, you've ruined the decorum in the Senate, which did not need any help. And so here we are with something that's never going to become law, at least right now. So, you know, I have a little frustration of everything that didn't get done because we had to do this cosmetic dance that isn't going to. So no transportation, very little on education, you know, very little on economic development. Healthcare, I mean, we're still not doing Medicaid expansion, which would be some of the best economic development the state could ever see. And so all of that didn't get done because we had to do this dance.
Steve Diehl, you work on the issue, but I'm just a simple hillbilly from Butler County. However, the last time some big politician said, I'm going to come help you deal with your employees, they handed me something called Obamacare, and I wish I could hand it back.
Sure. You know, it's really a unique issue because I'm proud to be a Republican. I like less government involvement in people's lives and in their business. I like legal reform. I like lower taxes. This issue is not a conservative issue. This is government saying, we're going to tell you how you handle a contract negotiation between employer and employee. This bill that they passed had a private cause of action, which now creates more lawsuits. Right. You know, so, you know, here's the problem, and it's the honest problem. Republicans have a distrust of unions, rightfully so, because unions have typically always supported Democrats. So when a Republican comes into the House, I think very few of them really know the mechanics of right to work, but they're initially for it because that's the other people were against me, so I'm going to be for it. I wish every rep and senator would take the time to really say, is this a conservative issue? Now, if they look at the issue and say, does government telling an employer how they handle their business, if that's conservative, then vote for it. But if it's not, don't vote for it. That's a message we've got to get out there. It's a tough message. It's not going to become law. I agree with Tim. I agree with Jane. But we need to be better at getting that message across, because when you've got a supermajority in the House and supermajority in the Senate and they think it's okay to increase lawsuits, to get involved in a contract negotiation between employer and employee, we've lost the message battle. We need to get that back, and we need to do it, and it's going to take some time. We're going to get there, but right to work is anything but a conservative issue. And the people that go around the state say we need worker freedom, we already have it. In my business, when you work for me, I tell you the parameters by which you're going to work. You're going to come in at this time. You're going to wear a uniform. If I'm
no one makes you work there.
No one makes you work there. If you feel like coming to work for me is not suitable, you have worker freedom to go work somewhere else. But if an employer wants to have all union workforce, that employer should have that right.
Absolutely.
It's their business. This is not a conservative issue. And I don't see how anybody can look at the bill that they just passed, which increases lawsuits, which increases government intrusion into people's lives.
He is up on the issue, obviously. Jeffrey, one bill that was conservative that will cut government was the municipal court reform.
Yeah, Senate Bill 5. Obviously, the issues that started in Ferguson affected the city of St. Louis. We had the protests, the rioting, and Mayor Slay has led a number of reforms in the city. I actually, back when the grand jury came back, was afraid that the legislature would do nothing. And I think Senate, when the national press comes back in August and says what has changed, if absolutely nothing had changed, the narrative for St. Louis would have been terrible. Now, are there other things that need to happen? Yes, but this was an area, this was one sweet spot. I don't think it's the only sweet spot, but it was one sweet spot where both Republicans and Democrats could agree, because nobody likes speed traps. Nobody likes, you know, it doesn't matter who you are. You don't like people to be treated unfairly, to be thrown into really what were debtors' prisons and things like that. So I think it was an obvious thing, but you know, today it looks like it was obvious, but if they hadn't done it, it would have been a real loss for our state. Now, we got a lot more work to do. Hopefully next session. I think the other thing Republicans and Democrats seem to agree on are body cameras for police officers, which I believe, by the way, is more favorable to police officers than to people who accuse police officers. We have more work to do, but I think that without that, it would have been a failed legislative session.
Steve Diehl, what's the most disappointing thing that didn't get done to you?
You know, I think when you look there, unlike most years, and I think the speaker and the Diehl and floor leader Richardson laid out at the beginning of the year, this is not a year that's going to be filled with big issues. We're going to try and do a lot of singles and not swing for the fences. So I don't think there was a lot of things out there that really had to get done that didn't get done. But I certainly think when the issue was taken up in right to work on the Senate floor, and as the senator will tell you, a PQ maneuver, which is quite unusual, in essence shut the place down. There's probably a lot of little things for local municipalities, you know, local fire boards, different stuff like that that probably didn't get done that probably needed to get finished. This may be the
only media outlet when they might be disappointed you didn't get a tax cut this year.
Yeah, no, I
probably not going to hear that other places, but
well, you know,
it is a little disappointing.
My position is we pay too many taxes, and we should allow people to keep their own money. And I think as a conservative, when you've got a supermajority, you know, and my friends here at the table probably disagree with me, but I think that should always be on the table.
Jen, did anybody get off work Friday and look at their pay stub and go, my gosh, I did not send enough money to Jefferson City?
No, but I do think this attitude that our elected leaders, and leadership is a tough thing, because leadership not only means you follow your constituency, but you also lead them. And I, for one, am personally tired of leaders telling you, you don't need to be taxed, you don't need to pay your freight, but yet you're supposed to expect phenomenal schools, phenomenal infrastructure. I mean, our infrastructure is crumbling. Our schools are not performing. We have an urban education crisis. Frankly, in Missouri, we have an education crisis across the state. Those things are not free. And I'm tired of leaders telling citizens, oh yeah, you can demand less taxes and demand more services, and this is all going to work out well. There is no free lunch. People need to start taking responsibility for what's important in this state, and we're not doing it. We have been kicking the can on transportation for more than a decade.
If what they provided was more valuable, people would pay more?
Maybe, and that's part of it too, and that never means that you don't get to do reform. I advocate Medicaid reform. I think it's essential.
If someone says I'm from the government and I'm here to help as a business owner, I'm scared to death.
Then that means you change the quality of the service.
And regulation is different than taxes. I mean, exactly. I think we do overregulate business, yes. but since your hero Ronald Reagan, we have taught people that they should expect a high level of service for a low cost, and some of these things are in common. One of the reasons why you'll get a TIF for a Walmart in one municipality in St. Louis County to move it 10 feet over a line is simply because their citizens don't want to have to pay taxes for their roads and bridges and parks. One of the reasons we have these kangaroo courts in St. Louis County, where we have some of these municipalities with 20, 30, 40% of their revenue from these traffic fines, is either they don't have the tax base or they don't want to have to pay the taxes. But they want the services. They want police. Yes. They want fire. Yes. They want nice parks. They want roads and bridges. They want good schools. And at some point, we do have to be honest with people and say, here's what you're going to get, here's what it's going to cost, and here's how you're going to pay for it.
Senator Green, last take on the session.
Yes, I want to add one thing we did not take care of is our infrastructure issues. In 2 fiscal years ago, we were spending about $1.2 billion a year on our roads and bridges. This current fiscal year, which ends June 30th, we're going to spend about $720 million. Next fiscal year, we're down to about $325 million a year. That's maintenance, repair, all infrastructure improvements. So in a matter of 2 fiscal years, we're spending close to $900 million less a year. And you're going to see more roads crumbling. You're going to see some bridges.
And we're going to have to leave it there, but we'd love you to come back and tell us how we're going to fix those going forward.
Okay.
And thank you very much for joining us on This Week in Missouri Politics. We'll see you here next week.